Roach Sin. Arshremen. Chapter 14. A parting gift for a hunter. Qun Shen could not wait for the Delphinity carrier to land. He pulled up his hollow slate and made a note of the trajectory of the insect creature in smoke-black armor that he had seen outside the carrier's windows. As a child he had been camping with his parents on the foothills of what was left of the Himalayas after the supercontinent had been formed. He had learned latitude and longitudinal positions on these trips and how to pinpoint his location, syncing the map on his hollow slate with the Pangaea's GPS satellites on Phobos 2 and 3. A few voice commands and a keystroke later on his slate and he knew the man-sized insect's trajectory. It was headed for Sea City 2, as was the Delphinity carrier. For Qun Shen this was part curiosity and part his morbid hobby of tracking, hunting and eating exotic animals. He had consumed large insects before, but they were an acquired taste. There was no hunting involved with insects, and as far as most of the world's animal populations were concerned, the majority were on the extinction list. The bulk of safe shelters in government-sponsored animal sanctuaries were not being funded, therefore the world's animal populations were in a steady decline. With hunting licenses scarcely being issued, big game hunting was now a sport only for the super elite or those who had very close ties to the council. He wished the cloning ban could be lifted, which would boost the Pangaea's animal populations once again, so he could enjoy the thrill of the hunt. As a young boy, to satisfy his hunting cravings, he had hunted and killed both domesticated and stray dogs as well as cats, by luring them with food. He had even maimed a neighbor's pet with his father's carbon-air rifle. The dog was so aggressive and such a survivor. Qun Shen had once jumped the chain-linked fence and had poisoned its food with rodent poison, which slowed it down, but also caused it to go blind in both eyes. Much to the emotional trauma and shock of the neighbor who loved that dog dearly. A week later, when the rodent poison and the air rifle didn't end the dog's life, the following day Qun Shen jumped the fence again, terrified the dog and killed him with a handheld crossbow he had borrowed from his first cousin. The arrow landed right between the blind and lame dog's eyes. Qun Shen's gruesome hobby would have labeled him a sociopath in his day and age. Nobody could understand his desire and enthusiasm to hunt and kill. He was a hunter, a bloodmouth, and a subhuman. He embraced all those labels with pride. He had been called far worse over the years when his morbid hobby had been discovered by both a handful of friends and dwindling family members. Qun Shen didn't care. He was stubborn to the point that if it were legal to hunt the most dangerous game of all, those that were exiled and isolated behind bars on Phobos 1's penal colony, he would relish the opportunity. He rose from his seat and walked to the rear aisle, passing the rows of passengers to the carrier's washroom. He was glad they were approaching Earth's atmosphere, where there was a stronger pull of gravity. He hated using the washroom's artificial gravity settings. This time he was just looking for an excuse to walk to the lower cargo hold. He passed the conference room, past the entertainment room where passengers' children were both lost and completely absorbed in a role-playing game inside a mini VHS. He knew there would be over Sea City 2 soon. He could see the blue outline of the Pacific Ocean from the passenger windows. He made his way to a small galley where refreshments were being prepared by two androids. "Sir, can I prepare something for you to eat?" asked the blue-tinted android. "The food on this aircraft couldn't satisfy any of my cravings. I always enjoy some fresh meat after an adventurous kill," Qun Shen said gleefully and half-jokingly. The android was silent. Apparently this model wasn't programmed with a sense of humor, Qun Shen thought. "I'm diabetic, I need my insulin nanoject, which I've left in my lug carry," Qun Shen fibbed. "Sir, passengers are not allowed to venture into the cargo hold. If you like, I am programmed to administer medical aid if you have symptoms of hyperglycemia," said the android with the utmost concern in his vocal harmonics. "I have a medical emergency." "Aren't you supposed to assist a human if you know their life is in danger? Isn't that compatible with the laws encoded in your positronic brain?" shouted an irate Qun Shen. "Yes sir, it is. However, we are 15 minutes away from reaching Sea City 2. My bioscan of your physiology reveal no manifestations of hyperglycemia at the moment." Kyun Shen realized he would have to pull rank with this android. He drew a small crystal prism from his pocket that had all his digital documents stored in holographic form. He keyed the prism, which displayed all documents stored in a blue, conical, film of light. He highlighted his Liquigen identification badge and showed it to the android. I am Director Sales and Marketing at Liquigen Corp. I am Lunar Director for Phobos 3 and Phobos 2. This carrier is owned by Liquigen, therefore Liquigen owns you. I'm no ordinary passenger on this commercial airliner. I'm an employee of this corporation, very high up the company hierarchy. You can scan the microchip in my wrist for further proof of my identification. You must comply. I need access to my lug carry in the lower cargo hold right now. Kyun Shen made a very convincing case. His voice was authoritative and his demeanor was akin to a gunfighter lawyer advocating his case in the lower courts. The steward android complied and opened the elevator shaft that led to the cargo hold. Unfortunately for Kyun Shen, the android also decided to accompany him, which to Kyun Shen was a major irritant. When the elevator pad descended and opened onto the cargo hold, the android used an old-fashioned, touch-screen console to feed Kyun Shen's passenger identification into the software, so the cargo hold operating system would select his lug carry and feed it to the luggage dispenser facing them. But Kyun Shen had other plans. As his lug carry came through the dispenser, it scanned his microchip for his biometric signature, and on confirmation the lug carry opened like a rose to display the various compartments he had stored in it. His clothes, shoes, washroom utensils and a dossier of private company documents were all there. He immediately pulled out a small lug pack which he put around his waist and clipped the straps around his shoulders into the lug pack belt around his waist. He grabbed another rectangular lug pack and threw it over his right shoulder and clipped it to the straps over his shoulders. Kyun Shen then jumped the cargo hold divider just like he had done in his youth over the chain-linked fence to terrorize and murder his neighbor's dog. He then ran through the cargo hold past all the luggage and the robotic arms that were busy storing all passenger lug carriers. "Sir! Sir!" cried out the android in absolute bewilderment. He knew the cargo hold had an opening ramp that allowed airport ground support vehicles in and out. He saw a small keypad to the right and hit the open cargo doors button with his thumb. The gust of high-pressure wind grew stronger and stronger as they were about 7,500 meters up in the sky. He braced himself and withdrew his jetpack and oxygenated helmet. He then engaged the manual throttle controls that unhinged from his pack and automatically placed themselves in his palms. He fired both jets in sequence, which produced 1,300 horsepower of thrust and took off in a downward descent towards the location of Sea City 2. Now where is that grand prize? That human-sized insect? He thought to himself. Below he could see the massive metropolis that was Sea City 2 sprawled out over the Pacific Ocean. Bladadizon was close to his prey. He was circling above a maternity clinic outside one of Sea City's districts. He had been told by Flocon that the largest source of fetuses would be found here. His partner in crime Ectobiizon was a few kilometers away on the roof of a private hospital looking for prey. They had not taken the scuttle ships directly into the Pangaea, but launched themselves into freefall after the scuttle ships had breached Earth's exosphere. Once they entered the thermosphere, both Bladadizon and Ectobiizon exited from their respective scuttle ships using their wings to glide towards their destinations, to complete their covered mission. Bladadizon was scanning females in the maternity ward with his RIA scanner that allowed him to pick up a special biorhythm given only by a mammal in the fetal stage of development. He needed to harvest stem cells from the fetus directly, and if he fell short of his individual quota, he would even harvest from the umbilical cord. Lately it had become cumbersome to take the mother hostage since storing the mother was taking up warehouse space and arousing too much suspicion with all the disappearances being reported in different cities throughout the supercontinent. He would use a peripheral syringe with a large bore needle synchronized with his RIA scanner and attached to his armor-plated gauntlet, that would stab through the womb and suck all the stem cells out of the fetus. The child's survival was a 50-50 chance. The mother's survival chances were greater if she could get medical assistance in time and be processed through ER in the nick of time, after experiencing septic shock. Bladadizon engaged his armor's camouflage device, effectively bending light and mimicking the shape and form of any reflective surface or any color, effectively blending into the electromagnetic spectrum. They will never know what attacked them, he chortled to himself. He enjoyed the mother's panic, the hospital staff's screams and dread. They were being invaded by an unknown camouflaged entity, and the pediatrician had no prognosis for the chaotic situation. The RIA scanner had located 6 mothers, who were at the crucial, fetal stage of childbirth. He couldn't harvest from all 6 targets, as the panic and anarchy created sent his targets fleeing in different directions. He would instead try for 4. As he circled around the top floor window of the 18th-floor maternity clinic while still airborne, he was about to engage his camouflage device, when he heard the sound of what he presumed was an aircraft above. Since it was unusual for aero vehicles to be flying so high, he thought. He guessed it was a small aircraft or a drone, but then out of the blue skies dove a human with a jet pack. The humanoid closed into about 5 meters above Bladadizon. Bladadizon felt a stinging pain as the frontal exoskeleton protecting his eyes was pierced by an arrow fired by this unusual individual with a jet pack. Bladadizon's exoskeleton had been shed a year ago and had taken 9 months to grow back, so it was still soft and not completely hardened. He dropped to a lower altitude and drew his ringgit cannon and looked up while firing 2 red rings in Kunshen's direction. Kunshen was ready for retaliation and expertly started strafing sideways and then began circle strafing Bladadizon. He had a limited amount of ammo in the drum disc that was attached to his crossbow, so he had to choose his shots carefully. Bladadizon was in pain from the first arrow still protruding out of the organic exoskeleton shell covering his eyes. The Earthican moved quickly, he surmised, but at a high altitude he knew the jetpack was no match for his powerful roach wings. He spread his massive 213 centimeters across wings and ricocheted straight off the maternity clinic's walls in a longitudinal direction for the clouds above. Kunshen got a glimpse of the creature under the cracked and chipped exoskeleton, which looked like one large pupil surrounded by an iris. With the hooded shroud now torn off, he could see with clarity who he was engaged in aerial combat with. He gasped as he now knew what kind of insect he was dealing with. The damn thing is a roach. A man-sized roach. Larger than a man, but upright and from the looks of things bipedal. The hunt was on. This was the most dangerous game he had ever hunted. He had heard stories of manhunts on Phobos 1's penal colony, but those must have been for the super elite. This was the closest thing to a manhunt. Excited by the prospect of this exotic kill, he flew in pursuit of Bladadizon. Bladadizon was goading Kunshen, making him follow him as he ascended higher and higher above Sea City 2. With the Pacific Ocean becoming a big, blue, canvas sprawl below them. Bladadizon had digital signaled to Ectobiizon that he was under attack and to form a pincer movement from both right and left to envelope this Earthican attacker. Ectobiizon had communicated that he had fulfilled his quota of stem cells from the hospital nearby and was en route to engaging the attacker. This disappointed Bladadizon. While Ectobiizon was his friend and fellow soldier, he had always been team leader and had always been the one to achieve all milestones first on any away mission. They had a friendly rivalry, and for the first time Ectobiizon was about to complete mission milestones before he did. This angered him, and against his better judgment, intoxicated with emotion, he made a quick turn, banking his wings, and abruptly dove down towards Kunshen, firing his ringgit cannon, hoping to eradicate the Earthican attacker quickly and get back to fulfilling his objectives, as this skirmish was outside his mission parameters. Kunshen saw the red circles coming in above him. He narrowly dodged the circlets being fired in his direction. Then out of the clouds came one very large, very angry roach close to Mach speed, hurtling down towards Kunshen with his wings tucked in. Kunshen could almost see the fire in Bladadizon's compound eyes, whose head was completely exposed with shroud and upper exoskeleton gone, but with just the arrow hanging off a chunk of exoskeleton to the side. This was due to the powerful wind currents being generated and whipping past him, because of his immense speed. Suddenly Bladadizon's compound eyes widened, as he noticed a rapidly accelerating object coming up behind the Earthican. At first he Thought it was ectobiizon, but then on closer introspection it was slimmer with a uniquely different outline and more humanoid looking, an android. The android started flying almost parallel to Kyun Shen. Blatadizon's cannon was charging. The android must be this Earthican's ally and wingman, he guessed. Blatadizon spread his wings and generated enough lift to pull himself up. He arched his abdomen and thorax and combated the heavy pull of Earth's gravity. He narrowly missed both human and android, and on observing a place in the sky to re-evaluate his strategy, he dove and descended through a heavy storm cloud below. Sir! Sir! I must say that was rather reckless of you. Jumping out of the carrier like that and flying off into the architect knows where, said the steward android, with a lot of concern in his vocal harmonics. Kyun Shen turned sideways almost as if he was swimming the freestyle to look at the android. His heart was beating like a jackhammer, he was terrified. The roach had tried to suicide dive into him and he hadn't time to maneuver, and here was this android reprimanding him for jumping off the Delphinity carrier. What are you doing here? Shouted Kyun Shen, who had slowed his momentum to almost 8 km an hour now. What was a very warm sunny day with very little wind, was now turning overcast and windy. Sir, I cannot possibly let a human endanger himself by jumping out of a Delphinity carrier, it violates my laws. Plus the cargo hold robot, dispensed another lug carry with your belongings. Kyun Shen noticed the android was carrying it like a lug pack. What's your name, android? Kyun Shen asked. Skybot 8735, sir, replied the android, also slowing to Kunshan's speed. Well, 8735, I am in the middle of a hunt. That creature that just dove past, well, that's a giant insect, a roach, and it seems the hunter is becoming the prey. A giant roach, sir? A very strange anomaly. Skybot 8735 said, stroking his alloy chin, contemplating what Kyun Shen had just described. Meanwhile, Blatadizon was strategizing on what to do. He knew there was limited visibility for the Earthican inside the storm cloud and limited visibility for him to view their current location. He was thinking, planning, and calculating. He had not expected two opponents. What's my next move? He asked himself rhetorically, waiting for his Ringgit cannon to complete its charge. In the meantime, Ectobiizon was talking to him on his encrypted COMM channel, reprimanding him for having broken formation. I see you are in a bit of a dilemma. You should have waited for me and not broken formation. That suicide dive towards the Earthican was not an aerial maneuver, it was a foolish strategy reserved only for an amateur, hissed Ectobiizon, thoroughly enjoying seeing Blatadizon in a bad situation. Listen to me, I was practicing aerial maneuvers when you were in an egg sac in your mother's abdomen. Do not lecture me on strategy, you nymph roach. I took you under my wings literally and vouched for your involvement in this mission to the Pangaea. Now, what is your location? My scanners were damaged by this Earthican's primitive weapon, however, my antennae tell me you are east of this storm cloud, about 70 meters away. Correct, east of you, at 120 degrees and a distance of 50 meters, and closing slowly and cautiously. Ectobiizon replied rather coyly. Blatadizon still detected a little defiance in Ectobiizon's voice. He would have to deal with this insubordination later and discipline this immature nymph. My antennae sense the Earthican approaching the cloud. I will bait him and the android towards and over Reaper's Island, just adjacent to Sea City 2. You come from the rear and flank them once we're over Reaper's Island. We'll use a hammer and anvil technique to crush these insurgents, commanded Blatadizon. Blatadizon's antennae could sense the repugnant smell of Kunshan's sweat that his skin was discharging profusely. He could also sense the crackling circuitry in the android's solar cells. As expected, the human and android had taken the initiative and dove through the thunder cloud, while Blatadizon waited for them to get into visual range, and then he bank turned and propelled himself with all the thrust he could produce in the direction of Reaper's Island. Kyun Shen couldn't keep up with Blatadizon's speed, but Skybot 8735 had an inbuilt jetpack which had a greater velocity and top speed than his. He was in hot pursuit of Blatadizon with his arms outstretched to latch onto his thorax as soon as he was within grappling distance. Closer, closer, Blatadizon thought to himself just over Reaper's Island. His antennae picked up the presence of another roach just a few meters behind him. Kunshan's hollow watch started beeping, showing him the cartography of Sea City 2 below, the Pacific Ocean and Reaper's Island. When he zoomed in further, the topography showed 3 airborne objects in close proximity, including a few scattered ones that were probably either birds, tri-ships, Delphin-iddy carriers, and aerobuses, landing and departing Sea City 2. The louder beep started when a 4th object was shown on the hollow topography, maneuvering just behind him. Kunshan turned as if he were doing the backstroke and saw a roach clad in full armor just behind him. He got a closer view of the roach's smoke-black armor and the red trim finish he saw from the Delphinid carrier during his flight back to Earth. That's the one, he thought. That's the big boss. Look at the size of that thing, it's longer, wider and carries more mass than the one we're chasing. Its head will look great above the coffee table in my apartment, thought Kunshan, again being a tad overly optimistic. Kunshan fired 2 rounds from his crossbow. Ectobiizon shielded his face with his right arm that was heavily padded with a smoke-black and red trim bracer. Both arrows shattered on impact when colliding with the armored bracer, inflicting no damage on Ectobiizon. Ectobiizon didn't draw his Ringgit cannon. This Earthican had no advanced weaponry, he concluded. He was going to tear him limb from limb and then take him back to Helmi-Econ as an after-dinner delicacy. Skybot 8735 turned his head slightly when hearing the impact of the arrows shattering. His positronic brain knew that the human named Kunshan had a limited probability of surviving a bout with this new threat. It already had the element of surprise. Skybot 8735 understood chess, not aerial combat, but the old-fashioned game of chess. Both these creatures were going to checkmate them, that was certain. They had been baited and trapped. His positronic brain switched to a contingency plan. He dived lower than Blatadizon, knowing fully well he was going to turn midair and seal the trap from both ends, from his side and his compatriot's flanking side. Just as Blatadizon's wings produced drag and hit his air brakes by cupping his wings in front of him, thus slowing his high speed and creating an air pocket which he was about to use to drop a little altitude and ricochet off of, back in the direction towards Skybot 8735 and Kunshan. Skybot 8735 was already a few meters below him, waiting patiently. Blatadizon cupped both his wings, induced drag, created the air pocket and then dropped altitude while simultaneously ricocheting back towards his prey. As he turned, to his surprise, all he saw was Kunshan and Ectobiizon in pursuit. There was no android. Until he suddenly felt Skybot 8735's powerful cybernetic arms grab him around his abdomen and then switch to a full Nelson hold, effectively pinning both Blatadizon's wings to his back and trapping both his arms, which made him drop his cannon. Skybot 8735 then, with a flick of his wrist, pulled the crossbow arrow that was dangling from a chunk of Blatadizon's organic exoskeleton and shoved the tip between his long compound eyes. Tell your compatriot that I will drive this edged weapon into one of your brains, if he does not cease the pursuit of the human. Tell him, sir, or I will end your conscious life right here, right now, then you can go on living as a disconnected body. Skybot 8735 declared in a very casual tone. Blatadizon sensed that the android was not bluffing. Weren't they programmed to protect the Earthicans at all costs? He used his antenna to signal to Ectobiizon to cease the attack as he felt the tip of the razor-sharp crossbow arrow edging closer and closer, within a few millimeters of his compound eyes. Ectobiizon hesitated for a moment. He could see Blatadizon upright and perfectly still, his wings incapacitated and the android holding his wings and arms both jammed together, trapped between the android's synthetic arms from his rear. He could also see an edged weapon pointed between Blatadizon's eyes. Blatadizon again commanded Ectobiizon to cease pursuit, and this time Ectobiizon made a full stop mid-flight and let his wings flap as he hovered over Reaper's Island. Qun Shen mistakenly thought it was his prime moment to seize this opportunity and kill this roach. He slowed and fired another arrow which Ectobiizon caught and then snapped the little bolt in half. He then pointed in the android's direction. Qun Shen turned around to see the other roach he had been pursuing, being held hostage by Skybot 8735. Skybot 8735 received another command on an encrypted frequency and nodded his head. Now sir, tell your compatriot to fly to the thermosphere and demand an extraction to your command ship. No tricks sir, I'm a lot quicker than both you and your friend combined. Ectobiizon received Bladadizon's message on his antennae. You know Earthican, I have been ordered to not kill you. I would have very much liked to have ripped you limb from limb, and that would have happened if your pet android had not intervened and taken a very old, feeble and incompetent team leader of mine hostage, Ectobiizon said to Qun Shen. I had no chance to finish the hunt and hang your heads above my coffee table? Did I? Asked Qun Shen in slight disbelief that this roach was speaking to him in fluent German. Hunt? You were hunting us? Aha! Child, you had zero chance. But why stop now? You're in a position of power, you have leverage over us, why not finish your hunt? Shoot me in the head with that toy of yours, smirked Ectobiizon, goading Qun Shen. Bladadizon overheard this conversation and demanded to know, communicating through his antennae, Ectobiizon, what are you doing? Ectobiizon removed his shroud and face armor, to reveal his monstrous and hideous roach face. His large protruding compound eyes staring straight at Qun Shen, his palps dripping with bile, below which his mandible pincers made a loud hissing and clicking noise. That hissing and clicking noise, Qun Shen thought. I've heard that before. Qun Shen understood that Ectobiizon wanted to complete the battle and was trying to antagonize him, because he would overpower and defeat both him and Skybot 8735. He did not give a damn whether his roach buddy lived or died. That hissing and clicking noise, he thought again. No, I choose to take no further action. Qun Shen said finally. In the distance a tri-ship was passing, leaving Sea City 2 in the direction of one of the Phobos moons. Its engines getting louder and louder. Then a parting gift, Hunter, Ectobiizon's ugly mouth pincers opened in a twisted smile, and instantly he spat a yellow, crystallized fluid at Qun Shen's face. It hit Qun Shen in the face and burnt immediately on impact. Qun Shen screamed. As the tri-ship passed, Ectobiizon was gone. Qun Shen was holding his face and then blinking wildly. Qun Shen turned and barely managed to fly to Skybot 8735. Don't worry sir, let's descend quickly and attend to your wounds. Qun Shen held onto Skybot 8735's shoulders as he descended with Bladadizon entrapped, onto the sandy and deserted beach of Reaper's Island. Skybot 8735 still had Bladadizon entangled in what was now a half Nelson. Skybot 8735 received another encrypted command and nodded his head again in acknowledgement. "Si, visitor, remember when I agreed not to kill you, if you wouldn't endanger the human and demand your compatriot cease pursuit?" "Yes. Now release me and uphold your end of the pact." Bladadizon sighed, completely numb and fatigued. All he wanted was this stalemate to end and pursue Ectobiizon, even have him taken off the roster of the stem cell harvesting team. "Well visitor, I'm going to breach our verbal contract. I am going to kill you." Skybot 8735 spoke in a placid, almost sedative voice. "What? In your own words, you made a verbal contract, you made a commitment. I did not have the human killed, I apologize for his facial scarring, but that was outside my locus of control. I did as you ordered, now release me." Bladadizon said, clearly panicking and completely overwhelmed with fear. As Skybot 8735 pulled the crossbow arrow back with his left arm to drive and plunge it into Bladadizon's exposed soft tissue and through his brain. In that moment, Bladadizon had a second to withdraw his fifth leg, which came out through his abdominal armor and trigger a fragmentation grenade in his thorax's leg. If he was going to die, he would die fighting with honor, killing this fork-tongued android in the process. The grenade went off. Simultaneously the crossbow arrow struck with such power and force that it pierced Bladadizon's conscious brain, and the explosion from the grenade enveloped both of them. Qun Shen turned to see a blurry, bright, red light encircle Skybot 8735 and the roach. All that was left of Skybot 8735 was his head, which was still functional with its positronic brain still operating. "I'm hungry, I want to enjoy my kill. I want to enjoy our kill," Qun Shen whispered. His vision was now fading and his head was throbbing. Both were a side effect of the acid that was spat onto his face. He was now acting on pure instinct. He reached into his clothing and pulled out a lighter, then grabbed some twigs, tinder, dry shrubbery, and fallen branches from the trees on the island. It took him a while to collect a large enough stockpile, and then he lit a fire. With his fading vision, which was reduced to shapes and outlines, he dragged Bladadizon's bulky carcass and put it on the flames, removing whatever chunks of armor his dimming vision could transfer between retina and the optic nerve. Bladadizon's 6 legs were pointing straight up in a perpendicular direction, twitching only slightly, even while he was being cooked while lying lifeless on his back. After about 20 minutes of Qun Shen cooking him, Qun Shen pulled out a small hunting knife and started tearing chunks of Bladadizon's cooked flesh off and consuming it. "What does it taste like, sir?" asked Skybot 8735. His head turned at an odd angle to look at Qun Shen, in the grainy and bright yellow sand of Reaper's Island. Skybot 8735's vocal harmonics, sound, and speech recognition hardware were still functioning. The fragmentation grenade had just severed his body. Qun Shen didn't answer at first. "It's the most disgusting fucking thing I've ever eaten." 8735. "It's repulsive. What in the architect's name am I doing eating this man-sized bug?" "To the hunter go the spoils, sir," asked Skybot 8735 almost as if he was attempting to make a joke. "I'll never touch meat again," swore Qun Shen out loud, as if was making some kind of oath to himself on this desolate and lonely island. "Never again." After a few minutes of silence between the two elapsed, "Well, sir, I commend you. It's scientifically proven that a plant-based diet is far healthier." Skybot 8735 said patronizingly. "I think I'm blind." 8735, "I think I'm blind," repeated Qun Shen, barely able to see the roach body he was cooking or the knife in his left hand. "Show me your facial injury, sir. I'm programmed to make a medical diagnosis." "Can you bring me closer?" asked Skybot 8735. Qun Shen lifted the android head and turned it towards his face. "Yes, sir, the visitor's bile fluid that he spat at you has caused a subdural hematoma traveling from the bridge of your nose all the way to your skull. It's caused a severe burn to the cornea in both eyes and has affected your vision, sir." Skybot 8735 spoke in a very soothing but concerned tone. "It is karma." 8735, "It's karma." "Karma, sir?" "Yes, for all the innocent animals I've hunted, killed, and consumed over the decades. For all the innocent beasts who pleaded with me with their eyes before I struck that final blow. All I can see now are their imploring and desperate eyes. That neighbor's dog that I poisoned when I was just 13, the one that went blind and then I went after it again when his owner was not at home to finish him off. I saw his pleading, blind eyes staring back at me, whining, whimpering and begging me to spare him, just before I caved his skull in with a shot. Then with a last gasp, those blind eyes went still, his jaw hung open, his body cold and inanimate. Right at this very moment, all I see are his pleading eyes staring back at me. I now understand what you mean by karma, sir," Skybot 8735 said in a more somber tone.